Jelani Blackshear is in police custody. He is a person of interest in a double homicide case last week in the deaths of 35-year-old Rachel Blackshear and her 14-year-old daughter, Jayla. Both were found dead in their Anchorage home on April 15th. Their bodies were also discovered 2 days after Alaska court records show Jelani Blackshear was charged with sexual abuse of a minor. The search for him ended yesterday morning in New York City. According to police, NYPD agents helped track his cross-country journey to a home in Staten Island, New York. A local NBC affiliate there is reporting that he's also being held without bail. The Anchorage Police Department is still investigating the deaths, and murder charges have not been filed. But Alaska's news source obtained court documents that detail 3 first-degree charges of sexual assault of a minor filed against Blackshear on April 13th. The criminal complaint and warrant for Blackshear's arrest show he was accused of sexually abusing Jayla, who is his daughter, in late March.
Support us by subscribing to this channel. Hit the notification bell icon so you won't miss our latest videos.
A mother and daughter missing for days, their phones active, their messages reassuring. But something felt off. Family members reached out again and again. No responses. Calls went unanswered. When the texts finally came, they were different. Cold, distant, not in Rachel's usual tone. Then the silence. A welfare check. A door pushed open, and inside, a home that should have been filled with life held only stillness. 2 bodies, a mother, a daughter, lifeless. Authorities didn't have to search long for a suspect. The signs had been there all along. The warnings, the investigations, the history that no one acted on until it was too late. The man responsible, someone they had trusted. A correctional officer, a husband, a father. And yet, somehow he was gone. This was not a crime of passion, it was something else entirely. Premeditated, precise, controlled. The texts, the planning, the flight across the country. What really happened in that house? What drove a man to commit the unthinkable? And how did he believe he could escape? The story of Rachel and Jayla Blackshear is more than just another crime. It is a warning, a reminder of how silence can be deadly, how the system designed to protect can fail, and how the people closest to us can be the most dangerous of all. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything. Rachel Blackshear knew struggle, but she never let it define her. Born in 1987 in Stockton, California, she was raised by her mother Jerry White and stepfather Anthony White after losing her biological father at a young age. She grew up in a home where love and hard work went hand in hand. She was ambitious, independent, and carried a quiet strength that made people feel safe around her. At 16, her life changed forever. She became a mother. While others her age were focused on school dances and college applications, Rachel was learning how to raise a child. She married young, hoping to build a stable life for her family. When her husband was stationed in Alaska for military service, she followed, leaving everything she had known behind. The marriage didn't last. The divorce left her at a crossroads: return to California for comfort or stay in Alaska to build something new. She chose the harder path. She stayed. Determined to give her children the best life possible, she worked tirelessly, balancing motherhood with an ambitious career. She enrolled at the University of Alaska Anchorage, earned her nursing degree, and never looked back. She worked long hours at Providence Transitional Care Center and Alaska Native Medical Center, dedicating herself to the care of others. She was a mother first, a nurse second. Her children were her world. No matter how exhausted she was after a shift, she made time for them. She never asked for help, never let on if she was struggling, never showed weakness. But everyone who knew her, Rachel was thriving, but strength can be deceiving. Even the strongest people can be trapped in silence. And when she met Jelani Blackshear, that silence would become dangerous. Jayla Blackshear was 14 years old, full of energy, full of dreams. She had a love for adventure, for movement, for pushing her limits. She ran track, not just for sport, but because she loved the feeling of freedom, speed, control. She was more than an athlete. She was intelligent, fun-loving, and deeply empathetic, the kind of person who noticed when someone was struggling and did something about it. Her dream was clear. She wanted to become a child therapist. Inspired by her grandfather's career in therapy, she wanted to help kids like herself, kids who felt unheard, kids who needed someone to stand up for them. She had her whole life ahead of her. But what she didn't know was that the biggest danger she faced wasn't out in the world, it was inside her own home. At first glance, Jelani Blackshear was the perfect partner. A correctional officer, a man with discipline and structure, someone who appeared reliable. To Rachel's family, he seemed charming, responsible, the kind of man who could provide stability. They trusted him. They had no reason to doubt him, but they didn't know his past. They didn't know that in 2019, a 4-year-old child shot herself in his home because he left a loaded gun on a kitchen table. They didn't know about the accusations of domestic violence and sexual assault. They didn't know that his job in law enforcement shielded him from accountability. They didn't know what he was capable of. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. For years, Rachel Blackshear had done what so many women in her position do. She endured. She had learned to navigate the tension, to read the unspoken rules of survival in her marriage. She had stayed quiet, perhaps believing that if she just managed things carefully enough, it wouldn't escalate. But in March 2022, everything changed. Jayla, now 14, was stepping into herself. She was growing into her independence, developing her own views, and pushing back against the authority that had always loomed over her. One night, she and her father had a fight. It wasn't about grades, it wasn't about chores, it was about identity. She had shared something personal, something deeply important. Jelani's reaction wasn't just anger, it was control. And that night, the control became something else entirely. The next morning, Jayla went to the only person she had ever truly trusted, her mother. She told Rachel everything. And Rachel did exactly what a mother should do. She took Jayla to the hospital. A sexual assault evidence kit was collected. She contacted the police. She reached out to Alaska Cares, a child advocacy center that worked with young victims of abuse. She didn't hesitate. She didn't waver. She was done staying silent. And in that moment, it seemed like she had finally taken the first step toward freedom. But monsters don't let go easily. Jelani had power, not just over them, but over the system itself. He had spent years in law enforcement. He knew how investigations worked. He understood what evidence could hold weight and what could be discredited. Most importantly, he knew how to make people doubt. Rachel and Jayla didn't go back home, not after what happened. Instead, they stayed in a hotel, hoping that distance would keep them safe. Meanwhile, Jelani was making his own moves. He also left the house, checked into a different hotel, watched, waited. At some point, he sent his youngest daughter to California, a decision that, in hindsight, would make perfect sense. He was planning something. And then, on April 3rd, something happened that no one could explain. Rachel and Jayla walked into the Anchorage police station, and Jayla recanted her statement. The case collapsed in an instant. What could make a 14-year-old girl walk back her own truth? There's only one answer: fear. Someone had gotten to them. Someone had made it clear what would happen if they went through with the charges. The police couldn't do anything without Jayla's cooperation. And just like that, their chance at justice was gone. That night, they returned home, and it would be the last night of their lives. The truth had been spoken. For a brief moment, it seemed like justice was within reach. The medical examination, the police report, the involvement of Alaska Cares. It should have been enough. The system was finally seeing what had been happening behind closed doors. But truth alone isn't always enough. Because when someone has spent years controlling others, they know exactly how to manipulate a situation. They know how to shift the odds in their favor. And Jelani Blackshear wasn't going to let go of that control without a fight. The exact details of what happened between March 30 and April 3 remain a mystery, but what is known is this: something changed. Rachel and Jayla had been staying in a hotel, physically distanced from the man they feared. Yet, despite that distance, despite the protective shield they had started to build, they made an unthinkable decision. They walked into the police station, and they took it all back. Jayla recanted her statement. The same child who had bravely told her mother everything suddenly denied it all. The evidence was still there: the assault kit, the medical examination, the records from Alaska Cares. Everything pointed to the truth. But the truth didn't matter anymore. Without Jayla's cooperation, the case was dead in the water. Why? What had changed? Had Jelani reached them? Had he made contact? Did he send a message, make a call, deliver a threat through someone else? Or was it something even more terrifying? Had he convinced them, truly convinced them, that the danger of speaking out was greater than the danger of staying silent? It's easy to say what someone should do from the outside looking in. It's easy to say, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they push forward? But what would you do if the person you were trying to escape had already proven they were capable of anything? Whatever happened, whatever was said, it worked. Rachel and Jayla left the police station that night, but they didn't go back to the hotel. They went home, back to the place they had once feared, back to the man who now had nothing left to lose. This was not a spontaneous act of forgiveness. This was a moment of survival. Had Rachel convinced herself that things would calm down? Had she thought that maybe, just maybe, staying quiet would buy them enough time to leave safely? Or was she already making plans? Plans Jelani couldn't afford to let her go through with. That night, their fate was already sealed. Because just a few hours later, at 1:20 a.m., Jelani Blackshear arrived at the house. Security footage confirmed it. Motion detectors inside the home captured his steps. Minutes later, gunfire echoed through the silence. No calls for help, no chance to run. By the time the sun rose, Rachel and Jayla were gone. And Jelani? He was getting ready to disappear. April 4, 2022. The house was dark, silent, the kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally, the kind that feels forced, unnatural, as if something terrible has just happened. Security footage placed Jelani Blackshear at the home just before 1:20 a.m., a man who, hours earlier, had lost control of the narrative. The investigation had collapsed. There were no more accusations. But was that enough? Or had the very act of trying to escape sealed Rachel and Jayla's fate? No neighbors reported hearing screams, no signs of a struggle, no one heard frantic footsteps, desperate attempts to escape, because there was no time for any of that. A gunshot, then another, and another. Inside that home, a mother and daughter were executed. Rachel was shot 4 times, in the head and chest. Jayla was shot twice, a child, barely a teenager, who had only wanted to live her truth. The bullets ripped through the walls, tearing through what was supposed to be a safe space, scattering into the yard, hitting parts of the neighborhood beyond. And then Jelani did something chilling. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He stayed inside that house with their bodies. Minutes passed, maybe hours. What was he thinking? Did he sit there staring at what he had done? Did he feel anything? Rachel and Jayla were out of town. They just needed a break. They needed space. He was creating time. And it worked. For days, people believed it. They wanted to believe it. Who would question a text message from their loved one? But lies don't last forever. Jelani knew that. That's why he didn't wait for the walls to close in. On April 5, just one day after the murders, he left Alaska. Hours after taking 2 lives, he was already setting his escape in motion. He contacted a friend in New York. He needed a place to stay. On April 6, he quit his job as a corrections officer. On April 7, he boarded a flight. By the time anyone even realized something was wrong, he was already gone. And for the next 10 days, Rachel and Jayla's bodies lay undiscovered inside that home, alone, while the man who had killed them walked free, believing no one would ever find him. For 10 days, Rachel and Jayla Blackshear lay inside their home, their bodies hidden beneath a blanket, their absence masked by carefully crafted text messages. For 10 days, no one knew the truth. The lie was working, but lies can't hold up forever. April 15, 2022. Rachel's cousin Shannon Thompson had been trying to reach her. Calls, texts, more texts. Days passed and the excuses coming from Rachel's phone didn't sound like her. The words felt off. The tone was wrong. And then silence. That was when the fear set in. Shannon reached out to the Anchorage Police Department, requesting a welfare check at Rachel's home. It wasn't an unusual request. People go off the grid sometimes, needing space, needing time. But this was different. Officers arrived at the house. They knocked. No answer. The door was locked. The silence was thick. Too thick. When they finally entered, they weren't prepared for what they found. A house frozen in time. The air stale, suffocating, the kind of stillness that only death can create. In the master bedroom, a blanket stretched across a bed, a shape beneath it, unmoving. They pulled it back, and there, after 10 days, they found them, Rachel and Jayla, side by side, shot, lifeless. The room eerily undisturbed, except for the blood. It was not a crime of passion. It was an execution. A mother and daughter silenced forever by a man who had once been a protector. The questions came fast. Where was Jelani? Why had no one suspected something sooner? And most importantly, how had he gotten away? Investigators immediately began piecing it together. The digital footprint told them everything they needed to know. The last real messages from Rachel and Jayla, April 3, the fake ones, all sent by Jelani. Then came the flight records. Jelani had left Alaska on April 7, disappearing before anyone had even realized a crime had been committed. He had been careful, calculated, but no one can run forever. April 20, 2022. Authorities had been tracking him, following bank activity, phone records, connections. And then, a break. A lead came in. Staten Island, New York. An address, a location, a chance to catch him before he vanished again. The U.S. Marshals and the NYPD moved quickly. They surrounded the home, ensuring there was no way out. Jelani didn't fight when they took him into custody. He didn't run. Because he already knew it was over. When asked if he knew why he was being arrested, he said only 2 words. I know. The manhunt had ended. But for Rachel and Jayla's family, the nightmare was only just beginning. The moment Jelani Blackshear was arrested, he stopped running. But he never started talking. There was no confession, no remorse, no attempt to explain what he had done. But he didn't need to speak. The evidence spoke for him. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline. They gathered every piece of information, every moment that led to April 4, 2022, the night a mother and daughter were murdered inside their own home. The case against Jelani was airtight. DNA evidence, phone records, flight bookings, surveillance footage. It was all there. And then the most damning evidence of all. The results from Jayla's sexual assault evidence kit confirmed everything she had said before she was forced to take it back. His DNA was there, undeniable. He had done what she accused him of. And then he had killed her to silence her. For investigators, it was clear this was premeditated. Jelani didn't snap. He didn't lose control. He planned it. From the moment Jayla reported the assault, he knew exactly how far he was willing to go to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. But now, the truth was everywhere. At his first court appearance in Brooklyn federal court, he showed no emotion, no plea for mercy. But the judge's response was swift. Bail was set at $15 million, one of the highest ever seen in an Alaska murder case. The judge called him manipulative, dangerous, a man with nothing to lose. The prosecution was building the case for the harshest sentence possible. For Rachel and Jayla's family, it wasn't enough, because no sentence could undo what he had taken from them. For Rachel and Jayla's family, there was no relief in knowing Jelani Blackshear was behind bars. Justice may have been moving forward, but it was too late. A mother and daughter were gone. Their absence wasn't just felt, it was a hole that could never be filled. Rachel's remaining children had lost their mother and sister in the same night. Their home was gone, their sense of safety shattered. They were sent to live with their grandparents in California, far from the house that had become a crime scene, far from the city where everything had fallen apart. But they weren't just grieving. They were terrified. Even with Jelani behind bars, the trauma remained. They had seen what happens when you trust the system to protect you. And now they would spend the rest of their lives living with the weight of that failure. The community was shaken. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a mother who did everything right, a daughter who had the courage to speak up, and a system that failed them at every step. If the law couldn't protect them, who could it protect? Vigils were held, balloons were released, Fly High Jayla was printed across t-shirts. Friends and family came together to celebrate their lives, but there was no escaping the anger that simmered beneath the grief. Because this never should have happened. People demanded answers, change. How had Jelani been allowed to stay in law enforcement despite his past? How had multiple warning signs been ignored? How many times does a victim have to ask for help before they are actually safe? The reality was painful. For every Rachel, for every Jayla, there are countless others trapped in silence. People who stay, not because they want to, but because they are given no real way out. Because when abusers hold power, through fear, through manipulation, through a system that looks the other way, escape is not as simple as walking out the door. For many, escape is a gamble, a risk they might not survive. And for Rachel and Jayla, that risk was fatal. Rachel and Jayla did everything right. They fought to escape, they asked for help, they trusted the system. And yet they were still murdered. This is not just their story. This is a warning. Because right now, somewhere another woman, another child is living this nightmare. Feeling the same fear, facing the same danger, wondering if anyone will listen before it's too late. Rachel and Jayla didn't get a second chance. But maybe someone else can. That's why this story has to be told. It's why the names of victims must never be forgotten. It's why abusers must never be allowed to hide in the shadows. And that's why I need you to take action. If you believe in justice, if you believe in exposing the truth, if you believe that no more lives should be lost this way, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because this is just one story. And there are so many more that need to be told. The more we speak up, the more we hold abusers accountable. The more we demand change, the harder it becomes for the system to ignore us. And the louder we get, the fewer victims have to die in silence. So don't just watch. Subscribe, share this video, keep their story alive. Because the fight for justice doesn't end here. And silence is not an option.